Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, Cara St. Louis returns to the show. Cara talks to us about her e-magazine, Vortex, Conscious and Courageous, along with offering her perspectives on a multitude of topics, including geoengineering, Gaza, Zionism, our dissolving borders, and the social engineering of our schools and society. Cara's current book, The Sun Thief, a great read, is available on Amazon.com, and she is putting the finishing touches on her new book, Aerosol War, The Covert Assimilation of Humanity. And to kick our discussion off, Cara comments on the recent Shasta County public hearing on geoengineering, led by Dane Wigington and Mark McCandlish, which resulted in standing room only attendance, forcing the mainstream media to have to report on the event. So without further ado, here is what Cara had to say.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Cara. How are you?
I am so happy to be here. I just love talking to you, you big old Mike, you.
Well, it's great to have you back.
It's great. You know, it's just, we get so much accomplished when we're talking together.
I know.
And yeah, so it's good. And I'm so happy that
It's
we
good to
kind of
talk
found
to
that.
like-minded people.
It is indeed.
Keeps
It
your
is
sanity.
indeed. It does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so you tell me, first thing, I know I just mentioned to Mike before he turned on the radio, the tape recorder, whatever it is that he uses, that I have a kind of a bulletin. I told my friend Mark McCandlish I was going to be reading this out over the air when I saw Mike today. And if you don't know who Mark McCandlish is, you will in a second, because I'll be telling you when I talk about my magazine. But Mark has been fighting the good fight for many, many years in regards to chemtrails and HARP especially. He is the man on HARP, on nanoparticles, and making all of that understandable to the ordinary person. He was absolutely instrumental in my life in the last 3 years in helping me get started in understanding all of this. And he lives in Redding, California, which is just south of Mount Shasta, which is a big, big, big hotbed for chemtrailing. And one of the reasons it is because all of the water that comes down off Mount Shasta actually goes all the way to Los Angeles and ends up in drinking water. So there are tons and tons and tons and tons of chemicals that come down in that area. And he sent me an email this morning, and I want to read it. It's very short, but it's very, packed with information. I don't know if you are aware of this, he said, but Dane Wigington and I, along with a dozen other people, had a public forum face-to-face with the Air Quality District Division of the Shasta County Board of Supervisors this morning. That would have been actually this morning, maybe yesterday morning. Like I said, he's writing from California, so it's 8 hours. It was declared the largest attendance by the public in board history. Every seat was filled, and everywhere else was standing room only. And boy, 3 minutes just ain't enough to flesh out the hazards this stuff poses for the public. I think I got their attention when I quoted the USAF, that's United States Air Force, study about the immune system being compromised by the aluminum nanoparticles in the air. Plus, we just had a big fire outbreak within the last 4 days. So the briefing given to the board by the local CDF division chief was a great segue into my detailing how the aluminum oxide and barium nanoparticles are the same things used in nanothermite explosives. According to the NOAA site I looked up at 3 a.m. last night, it said that the forest fires in California have doubled in burn acreage in the last 10 years, as has the cost of suppression. And can I just say, Mike, that if you want to know more about that, that's a big part of what the Sun Thief is about. So I will say that to you shamelessly right now. If you want to know what that's all about, you read that book.
Yes.
One of the characters in that book is what we call an aerial firefighter.
Yes.
Bird dog. He's a bird dog.
A bird dog. There you go. Yep.
Anyway, that's Mark McCandlish, and I told him this morning I was going to read that out because there's a lot in there. You don't have to know a whole lot about everything. If you just know about aluminum nanoparticles, you know enough to bring the whole thing down.
Well, what you need to do first is, look up at the sky and take a look at the aerosols.
Yeah, you'd think, wouldn't you?
Right. And then from there, then you can follow the aluminum trail and the barium and the strontium. I was just out in Topsail Island in North Carolina, Cara, and just beautiful, beautiful beaches. But I took some pictures at 9 o'clock in the morning. They were just spraying away. Mm-hmm. And the sky over this beautiful beach in North Carolina was just a grid of aerosol lines as far as the eye can see. The really disheartening part about it is that aside from me and Rebecca, nobody else noticed.
Yeah.
That I'm aware of. Yeah.
That is disheartening, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, but I
I'm
mean, that's a
saying,
very good story that you just gave to the audience with regard to Mark and Dane doing that presentation, because standing room only, that's a big deal.
that's a big deal. And like I said, that water table from Mount Shasta, that water that's the drinking water all the way down the California coast to Los Angeles. So whatever they put on Mount Shasta ends up in your stomach in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And boys, I can say that one thing I know for sure is there aren't very many boys being born in Los Angeles. Certainly not nearly as many as there used to be.
Yeah.
You know, that's the feminization, that's the biology they're changing, all of those things. However, you and I have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to let you guide the conversation a little bit because you know how I am.
Well, we have no, this is great. You know, it's freewheeling. It's fantastic. We want to talk about Vortex, Conscious, and Courageous, which is your e-magazine
I do.
on the web. I was hoping, Cara, you could tell us a little bit more about your e-mag, the intent, the contributors, and so on.
I certainly can. First of all, it's, as you said, it's called Vortex, Conscious, and Courageous. And right now I will just tell you to get there, go to www.vortexcourage.me. So it's www.vortexcourage.me. That's where we're located. We also have a Facebook site. You can look up Vortex, Conscious, and Courageous on Facebook, but that's not the magazine. Now, I started this magazine about the 23rd of June, I think, so it hasn't been up for very long, but we are in 80, Mike, I didn't tell you this, we're in 80 countries as of this morning.
Great.
I'm stunned. We are in 80 countries, and like I told you earlier in the last 3 days, viewership has absolutely skyrocketed. So that has a lot to do with A, our purpose, and B, the generous contributions of folks whom I've come to know in the last couple of years. Some of them, one of them, Mark McCandlish, we just talked about him, I knew before I left the United States. He is a bit pressed for time, so he's just on the verge of making his first contribution, which will be the feasibility of interstellar flight, thank you very much. And part of that is a debate that he got into with an expert, and that he really slapped this guy back down. I wouldn't ever want to debate Mark on anything technical, especially when it comes to black ops, state of the art, and then some aviation, materials, flight. This guy is I don't think there's anybody who knows more outside perhaps the skunk works at Lockheed than Mark. So, and actually Mark was the technical advisor on the Sun Thief. I did months and months and months of research on the aviation in that book, but I'm not a pilot. And so I approached Mark just because I had seen him and listened to his radio interviews, very much like what we're doing here. And he had taught me so much. And I just sort of took a shot in the dark, which is kind of how I live my life anyway. And I said, Mark, I'm writing this book and here's the deal, and would you be willing to look at some of the technical stuff? Well, he said, sure. But in the end, the man ended up spending weeks with me on, via email, reading and checking and suggesting and making sure that when the pilots and the military people whom I really hoped would read the book did, they wouldn't just I wouldn't lose my credibility with them by making really stupid mistakes,
Right.
Plus, I wanted him to check the nanoparticle science and things like that, because these were things that I was just learning. So this is Mark McCandlish, and he's also one of the characters in the book is based very closely on Mark. So that's kind of cool too. But Mark is going to be a contributor very shortly, and I did just talk about him. Everybody else that I've met since I came to Europe. I moved to England a couple of years ago, although the first year I was back and forth a bunch because I do have adult children in the United States. And so the first year I went back and forth 6 times. It was insane. But because Germany picked up The Sun Thief almost immediately and ran with it, they really quite liked this book over there. I was able to meet a lot of people via the alternative media there. One of the people I met on March 1st of this year, I'm never going to forget that, was Mike Tellinger. Michael Tellinger and I were speaking on a panel together, and it was the most insane coincidence. 3 days before I left for the conference, I saw my first interview that on YouTube that he had given. And I was so impressed. I was blown away by this guy, and I thought, my gosh, I have to find out what this guy's doing and get some more of his stuff. The next day, my publisher, who put the conference on, sent me a revised poster of the folks that were appearing, and by gosh, there was Mike. Michael was coming to the conference.
Oh, wow.
I could not believe it. I was so excited. He is he's an investigator in South Africa. He has found some ancient sources of energy that will blow your mind, absolutely blow your mind. In fact, I think there are these stones that he talks about that he's actually travels around with and will show you. And actually one time got taken off of a plane. He had one of these stones with him in a suitcase in the hold, and it shut down the tower or something. These things are that powerful. He tells that story when he's traveling. I'm working on Michael, waiting for his first contribution because he and his partner Louise Clark has spent the last 6 months touring the world, telling their story, trying to right now I think they're trying to raise funds to offset a political debt that he ended up with. It's not huge, but because he's the head of the Ubuntu party in South Africa, by default he ended up running for president this last time, and it looked like, what it looks like, I think, in fact, we may have talked about this last time, but what it looks like is that they had something like 200,000 votes that got reported as 1,500 votes. And Michael, being Michael, is not going to pursue that because he has positive things he wants to do. So he's just sort of walking away from that, paying his bills and getting on with their lives, which is about free energy and contributionism and all of these wonderful communities and being a freeman. He calls himself Michael of the House of Tellinger because he doesn't buy into that corporate construct anymore. So he's got lots of things going on. And then I have recently come across a group of Latin American and Spanish poets, and I'm trying very hard to make them a lively part of our site. In fact, I interviewed about 10 of them last night, conjunct with an event where it was a book launch for a new book on Allende in Chile, 1973. And by the way, he was killed on 9/11, 1973. And there were 10 of them there, ranging from Mexico to El Salvador, two men from Chile, and this woman, several others, and this woman, Sofia Buchuk, who is Peruvian and is contributing in Spanish and in English to the site and has been doing that for a week or two now. And that's bringing in the Spanish-speaking population, because one of the things that I really want to do with this magazine is include the whole world in the discussion. I'll interrupt myself here very briefly in talking about the contributors to talk about the reason that this magazine came into being, and that is because I had joined a television project out here in London after Christmas in early January, whose goal was to create a global conversation. And that is the ideal is hugely important because we have to have the continents talking to each other. One of the reasons they've been able to do exactly what they want to do is because they keep the continents wrapped in cotton and we don't know what's going on from one place to the next, which I found out when I left the United States. I had no idea how much I did not know about what was going on in the rest of the world. And I think I can safely conclude that the United States is kept more in the dark than just about every other country in the world. And I have my theories as to why that would be so. But anyway, this television project collapsed, and there didn't seem to be anything that we could do to save it. And so I took everything that I had learned in 3, 4, 5 months and all of the people that I had met, and I turned probably the next day, started this e-magazine so that we could continue that gesture in the world. And I think that the fact that it's being as successful as it is, thanks to the help of the people I've met in the last year or two, is proof that, in fact, this is necessary, needed, and people are they're not just waiting for it, they're out there actively looking for it and finding it. So anyway, so that was one of the reasons this got started. Getting back to my beautiful, wonderful, gorgeous contributors, I also have one of my very favorite people in the whole wide world. He's a fellow called Gilad Atzmon. Gilad, see, I laugh just thinking about him because he's just so funny and so amazing and so courageous. Gilad is an Israeli. He is living in London as an exile, in self-exile, because he has taken up with a vengeance, anti-Zionism and the Palestinian cause. And that makes him very unpopular in just lots and lots of circles. But he's also very popular in other circles because he's also a world-renowned jazz artist. He's a saxophonist. His band travels all the time and regularly sells out the London Jazz Festival. And I recently conducted an interview with him in which I actually convinced him to start playing his sax at the kitchen table, which was wonderful at the end of the, I know, right? At the end of the interview. And I will show that when I can. This belongs to footage that I actually had to rescue from nefarious characters at said television station. And I believe that all of that footage is going to be in my possession as of tomorrow. And I am very, very happy about that. It does belong to me. It just wasn't easy to get people to let go of it. So I will be starting to put some raw footage up on my e-magazine as well of some of these interviews, and they're video interviews. So anyway, and then moving along, you can see all of these people in the archives and on the main page of our site. I've got Les Visible. For me, Les is a coup. Les is a score and a half for me. I was so excited that he agreed to contribute because I love this man's work. You can find Les at smokingmirrors.com and all of his subcategories of places where he puts his point of view. And he is somebody whose vision is absolutely unique and his way with words is extraordinary, and I always enjoy reading him. And actually, he is the first article I put up, it seems like way back when, and it was called, it was on political correctness. Okay, I asked him to write something about political correctness, and he said, well, that's the most dangerous thing that's loose in the world, so I'd be happy to. And so that was the first article that we put up. I think it was the sign of the devil or something. Political correctness and the sign of the devil, something like that. And then we have this fellow called Simon Ludgate. Simon Ludgate is something of a jester, too. Now, Simon is actually a very well-known director. Simon has done stuff in the mainstream. Very much in the mainstream, BBC, National Geographic, documentarian, things like that. And so Simon very much has a foot in both worlds, and he's written a couple of books that are supposed to be extraordinary, and I'm going to be reading them very shortly, and I encourage everybody to read Simon's work. He also does some pretty serious investigative journalism, and I think he's a medium. He has several sites. What I'm trying to do on the magazine is create a page for every contributor. That takes some time because every one of these people is so tremendously accomplished that it's difficult to get all of their stuff in. But they all deserve it, and so eventually they will all have it. And Simon is one of the people who actually does have a page. If you want to look him up and look up his books, I really encourage you to do that. Then, again, we have this fellow called F. William Engdahl. Have you heard of him, Mike?
Yep, I have.
Yeah. He is one of the world's preeminent geopolitical analysts.
He's great.
He is amazing. And I interviewed him for a television show in Germany called Free Spirits TV, which is a subcategory of a show that's actually done in German. And I will talk about that fellow next. But I bothered William because I can actually use that word very sincerely. But we both were writing for Veterans Today. And I saw his work. I know this guy lives in Germany. I'm in and out of Germany so much. I've really got to get an interview with him. I got him onto that television station once or twice, and I just bothered him until he agreed to give me an interview. And then this man even got on a train and went from Frankfurt to Bremen so we could film him in the TV station and stayed overnight and then went home. So in the end, I don't know if it pays to talk to me or not, because these are the kinds of things that can happen. But I ended up doing an interview with him that I'm actually exceptionally proud of, where he talks about the Ukraine, Syria, and China, and gives very simple, easy to understand, and logical history on what's going on there. And I think was probably one of the first people who brought up the idea that this was a color revolution again that's going on in the Ukraine. Who's behind it? It's a recipe they're using all over the world. We're just dumb as a box of rocks if we haven't picked this up yet, right? And why Ukraine isn't jumping ship to Russia. The Ukrainians consider themselves to be Russian now. there's, explaining that they speak Russian, they consider themselves to be Russian. There's no Russian takeover of the Ukraine,
Right.
So this is something, of course, we in America don't know. Anyway, William, I've also done a review of his book, Target China, which is really interesting. So you can read the review. It's also there in German on the magazine. And then he's making some contributions of his own. He wrote an article on ISIS and those sorts of things. So the next fellow on the hit parade is called Joe Conrad. I owe Joe a great debt. I owe Joe a great debt. I do indeed. He has a little, it's not little because he's got a huge following, but the studio is small in Bremen. He runs a show called Bewusst TV, which means spirit, I believe spirit TV or spiritual TV, something like along those lines. And yes, that's German. So he took an interest in my book in January of 2013, flew to London on his own dime and interviewed me here and then took that footage back and put the interview up in English and then had it translated into German. And that is actually how I got into the German market with The Sun Thief. And the Germans loved that book. So as you can see, this is the first person who helped that book see the light of day and breathe some air. And so what I do for Joe, my Joe, is whenever I'm in Germany, I travel to Bremen and we do English language interviews for him. And I interview him and anybody else he wants me to interview in English for his channel. And I will do that as long as he wants me to do that. And he has just written something in German and put it on the website about the Monday marches. Do you know about the Monday demonstrations in Germany?
I'm not sure. Is it about the central banks?
It's about everything. All over Germany, the citizenry is turning out in the major cities for demonstrations and speeches every Monday.
Okay.
And somehow this is a tradition that was pre-World War II perhaps, or it used to be so, and it is so again. And the world doesn't know this is going on. But the citizenry of Germany is turning out every Monday, and they are protesting everything that you think should be protested. And in Germany, that's a major coup because they don't like people speaking their minds there. So he's written an article about that in German right now, and it's on the site.
Okay, because I remember reading a story not too long ago about the Germans coming out and protesting about the central banks. And
they are being vocal about all of the things that they can be vocal about. And so Joe is providing you with information about that. And we have this woman called Maria Wheatley. Maria is a caretaker at Avebury, and this is one of the monolithic sites near Stonehenge. She is astonishing. This woman is astonishing. She is an expert on water, forms of water, monolithic energy. She's a master dowser, and she learned that from her father, who's a man called Dennis Wheatley, who was apparently a very famous author who I had not heard about. And that's just my, a failing in me, really, because the guy was massively popular and well-read. And she's giving us articles about power centers and ley lines and the various forms of water. And she has lots to say about fracking and how that interferes with the sacredness of water because honestly, Mike, water is a being. It's a living being. It's alive. It's alive until we run it through pipes. Water does not like right angles. Nothing in nature likes right angles, which is one of the reasons when you look up in the sky and see a grid pattern, you really should start to scratch your head because that's really not natural. There
Exactly.
are no right angles in nature. Anyway, Maria, I have an interview with her that when I get that back tomorrow, I may put it up as raw footage on the site because it's just sort of astonishing. When I was sitting in a pub in Avebury interviewing her, she and I were talking just very casually about this, that, and the other thing, and I had mentioned the fact that my mother had been killed, and that's why I wrote the book, and, I talk about that. And we were sitting over a well. There's a well in the middle of this pub. It's supposed to be haunted, and you can't see the bottom of it and all those sorts of things. And just as I said my mother, this giant flash of light hit us, and it's on film. And there was no traffic, no nothing, no cars going by. And we have this fellow, Christoph Herstel. Christoph Herstel, again, is a German. Now, he was a journalist probably for 20 years or more. He lives in Potsdam, Germany, which is near Berlin, and he was really the last man standing with Hamas in some of the wars some of the scuffles that have happened in the last 20 years. He speaks regularly with newspapers and television shows in the Middle East. and has a lot to say about what's going on there now because he has a lot of contacts, boots on the ground in Afghanistan, in Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, and he's writing about, like a lot of us are right now, about the Gaza and what's going on there. And but he's writing in German, and so I post his things. He also did something lovely recently. If you have a chance to look at it, it's called A Letter to My Russian Friends, and it's actually in English. And it's a plea to Russia to help stop what's going on in Ukraine. And I thought it was absolutely beautiful, and I was very grateful that he put it in English so that we could all read it.
Now, Carrie, just for a second, what's going on in Gaza?
What's going on in Gaza? Well, what's going on in Gaza? It's really simple to say what's going on in Gaza, and yet it's so horrific that it sort of seems sad to put it so simply. But hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people are being killed in the Gaza Strip, Palestinians, by Israeli rockets. And I think Israel just had perhaps their first casualty. And supposedly what's going on is that Israel is retaliating for a Palestinian attack, but that's absolutely not what's going on.
Right.
They're just continuing their murderous genocide.
It's genocide. Yeah.
It's absolute genocide. Usually I don't post photographs. You know, sometimes people can put photographs up on Facebook regularly.
I saw those photographs. Yep.
To be just too shocking.
Yeah.
And too in your face. And especially when, just personally when it's about animals, because I'm a vegetarian who tries to be a vegan. I mean, for me, it's preaching to the choir, and I don't need to see that. But I put those pictures up on my Facebook, my personal Facebook, because I want people to understand what's going on there. I want people to understand that these are children and mothers and grandparents, and Israel has no right to be killing those people. None. This is murder. This is out and out psychopathic genocidal murder. There is no justification for this, none whatsoever. And recently, in fact, 2 or 3 days ago, my husband and I were driving in London, and there was a massive roadblock. Not roadblock, but I mean traffic was just crazy, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. I wish I had known, because there were tens of thousands of people protesting outside the Israeli embassy here in London, which probably not many people know about or realize, certainly not in the United States, against what's going on in Palestine. The world has had enough, Mike. The world has just freaking had enough of what Israel. 1948, I don't care if they take that year off the calendar. Erase it. I don't want to hear 1948, because it's all a fiction anyway.
Well, you know? It was given to the Zionists in 1948 by the UN without any input from the Palestinians. They essentially just took sovereign land and handed it over to the Zionists. And if anybody, and I'll just comment here, if anybody ever sees a map of what Palestine looked like in 1948 versus Israel, and you take a look today, that map looks nothing like it did back in 1948. It's been completely commandeered by the Zionists.
And there's no rationale for it other than they wanted it, so they got it. And now they're exterminating the people who are already there. This is the predator, Mike. This is the predator that I talk about.
Yeah.
This is the predator. And that's just a representation, a very brutal representation of the predator. Okay? And I've worked, since I came to London, I've worked with people who were in broadcasting, who were Zionists, and I've seen how it works. I've had my work censored. I've been shut up. I've paid prices for standing up for people who are against what Israel is doing and will not be silenced. I mean, that's going on in a big way in places that you wouldn't even begin to think it could happen. But it's going, I mean, the reality is that people have had enough. But you know what I recently found out, and I guess maybe you already know this because it seems like a lot of people do, but there are gas fields in the waters off Palestine, off Gaza. And that's one of the things that Israel wants, is those gas fields. Did you realize that? Because I just found this out.
Yeah, no, I did know that. And I also, it's a radical fundamentalist mentality that the Zionists have. They believe that entire area, we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about Iraq, we're talking about Iran, all of that, they're looking to tuck in under their bailiwick. And a lot of people do not realize, Cara, that, and this is never spoken about, Israel is the fourth largest nuclear power in the world. behind the
Yeah.
U.S., the Russians, and China. They're ahead of France. And I don't think that Israel has ever signed a non-nuclear
No.
proliferation act either.
No. As a matter of fact, I didn't know where they ranked in terms of
I believe it's
their
fourth.
capability,
Hmm.
but I do know about the Samson option. You know about the Samson option?
Yes.
Yes, most of the world doesn't know about the Samson option, but they have really made no bones about it. If Europe tries to protest what they do, they have said they'll just nuke us to kingdom come.
Right.
Okay, so this is the psychopathy that we're dealing with here.
Now, the Samson option, which we should maybe expand on a little bit for those that don't understand it, I will tell you that my understanding of it is that there is I'll call it a theory, that there are strategically placed nukes within this country and probably elsewhere in the world in order to keep everybody rowing the boat in the same direction, keep them together, right, in order for the Zionists to be able to continue on their trek of commandeering sovereign land.
Right. And when we get to the part later on in the conversation, we should bring Israel back up because
Okay.
this is one of those situations that weaponized political correctness works really well.
Yeah, well, I probably got us a little sidetracked there, so I don't know.
No, that's fine because it needs to be talked about. These things cannot be allowed to continue. They cannot be allowed to continue.
What
And
kind of pulse are you seeing in the UK or in Germany with regard to how much disgust there is over what's going on? Because here in the United States, I'm not really sure. I think most people have their heads still stuck in the television set and, eating Big Macs.
yeah.
But I am seeing more and more people becoming aware that, what is going on?
Well, I think it's because we're closer geographically,
Yeah.
and so there's more of a possibility. Although I think this is very much changing in the United States, that young men and women who live in the EU could be sent to these areas, and so it's more in your face.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there are a lot of Israelis living in London who have run away from this, who are mortified and ashamed and can barely live with what their country is doing, and they tend to try to spread the word. And so there's a little bit more knowledge about that. I think that Europe in general is sick and tired of the Israelis. Europe in general is sick and tired of what they're doing not because they're anti-Semitic, please, but because what they're doing to the world is rape, okay? They're just raping the entire world physically and financially, and this is the predator.
Yeah.
This is one of the faces of the predator, and it's very, very obvious here in Europe and in England. So I know that it's not quite as well known in the United States. I know there's still some very powerful Zionist factions in the United States. For example, my friend Gilad travels all over the U.S. He loves the United States. God bless him. He just sees nothing but the good stuff. And so he travels there speaking and playing as often as he can. But there are states he's not allowed to enter. There are sovereign states where he cannot go. And you might be surprised at one of them. He cannot enter the state of New Mexico, because there are some powerful Zionists there who do not want him there.
Interesting.
One would never have thought New Mexico.
Well, I was just going to say the Zionists own and control the United States.
Well, they do.
Absolutely. And we have dual citizenship, American Israelis in the government working in the State Department. So when everybody scratches their head here in this country and can't figure out why things are going the way they're going, well, they should probably look at Zionism.
Well, one of the things I'm looking forward to right now is I have a friend who showed up here yesterday, who has another friend who filmed that protest outside the Israeli embassy on her phone. Tried to put it up on YouTube. Of course, it was immediately taken down, but she still has it on her phone. And what she said, one of the things that she wanted me to see was the number of Hasidic Jews that were protesting. Once I get a hold of that film, I will try to put it up, and we'll see how long it will stay on Vortex.
Yeah.
And I'll send it to you. I'll send it around as well, because the more places it is, the better off we are. But she said there was a serious, and you will find that if you check with some of the alternative news agencies around the world, and you should, you will see lots and lots of footage and stories about Hasidic Jews protesting what their government's doing. Right in Israel, they don't want us to know that. So that's where we're at in those terms, that's where we're at. But anyway, let me finish up my
Sorry.
roll. No, let me finish up my roll call right here. I have Yashka Ramelow. I have to say Yashka's my husband. I'm going to just say that. Yashka, although Yashka very much deserves to be one of the contributors, he has been practicing Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and all of those Eastern medical arts for 35 years here at Neal's Yard in London. Even though he's German, he's been doing it forever. And so he has a lot to say about nutrition. He has a lot to say about things like the pharmaceutical industry. And he's been contributing those sorts of articles to the magazine. And he is well worth reading because he has very alternative views on all of this stuff, And so anyway, he's our health person. And
Well, maybe I should interview your husband because I love doing shows that deal with alternative wellness and alternative health.
Well, you know what, you should, but let me just tell you this, he's writing a book as well.
Okay.
So when that's done, I'm going to send him your way because you really should interview him.
I will.
And we'll do that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have this fellow Jack Hart, whom you know.
I know Jack well.
Jack writes like a banshee, man. He writes like a samurai. I met Jack. I came across Jack when we were both working for Veterans Today. And 2-second plug, Gordon Duff is one of the only people in the United States who's allowing the truth out through his magazine. Thank you, Gordon. Regardless of whatever else happens, it's still an outlet for people to say whatever the hell they want to say for the most part. And Jack got some extraordinary articles up there that were very esoteric in nature. And so, of course, that attracted my attention. I went, whoa, what is this? And I started to read his stuff, and I was just absolutely blown away. And so we actually kind of just became fans of each other's work. And so, of course, I wanted Jack to send me his stuff, and he did, and it's turned out to be he's a massively popular contributor on Vortex. People really love his work, so I recommend it highly. What he's given to me is Madonna, the Black Madonna and the Swastika, and if that doesn't attract your attention as a title, I just don't know what will. So I learned so much from Jack, and he is a very generous and giving human as well.
And he gets no sleep.
And he gets no sleep, and I am now pestering him too, which is terrible, but he doesn't seem to mind it too much. And then we also have the person I call the one and only Sophia Smallstorm. Her name fits her really well. She is one small storm. She is another person who taught me so much in her understanding about transhumanism in particular, Morgellons in particular, and what's going on there right now. She is one of the most active activists and writers about the subject in the United States, and she's also one of the most down to earth. You can get a hold of her, and she will talk to you and those sorts of things. And so she has been contributing some of her peripheral interests. We have an article called The Butterfly Effect and the Insurance Business, and we have an article on common law from her, with some interviews from people who've actually been in the courts and been arrested by the IRS, and the IRS has tried to force them to testify against themselves. All those sorts of lovely things that go on in the United States. So she has been very generous with her work. Then we have this woman called Christy Tietier. Christy is a trip. Christy lives in California, and I met Christy because when I was putting articles up on Veterans Today on transhumanism, she wrote me the most amazing novel-length rebuttals to the articles that I put up, and they were all very cosmic and very esoterically logical, and all of these things that let me know that Christy is a very deeply universal soul with a lot to say, and she does have a lot to say. So she is writing for us a series called 0 Point Energy. That is not about electricity and keeping your house warm. That is about metaphysics. That's about cosmic law. And so you need to keep a lookout for those. And Jerome Putnam is a fellow who lives in Switzerland, and he is writing about the history of the hallucinogenics right now. Things like the peyote ceremony in Native America. And
ayahuasca.
The ayahuasca stuff, and what would have happened if Timothy Leary hadn't been in charge of the LSD experiments in the United States. And I mean, so this this is some interesting stuff and some really unique voices, you know. And I've also got Harold Calzabella, which I'm going to save him for later because he is my man. He translated my book into German, and he and I are writing a book together right now. We can talk about that in a little bit. And then, of course, I already talked about Mark McCandlish. So right now, this is the lineup, and I think it's extraordinary.
It's a great lineup.
And I can't believe my great good fortune. But you know what's going on now, Mike? It's like how you and I started talking to each other. People are being drawn together. They're meeting. They're starting conversations like they'd always been in conversation.
Right.
And so there's a destiny question here. People are coming together to do things that they're meant to do together. I firmly believe that. And creating things that are really just bigger than themselves.
Well, and the propaganda hasn't worked as well as they had hoped, you know. So there's a lot of people that haven't been sucked into their black hole.
Yeah.
And we're coming together as a community and getting the truth out.
Well, certainly enough of us. We don't need everybody, but if everybody was in the know, that would certainly be great.
Right.
Unfortunately, the 20th century, as you know, my characterization of the 20th century is just a snapshot in social and cultural engineering. It was a giant experiment in how to move what they might call a herd of people from one place to the next, or get them to do or not do what you want them to do. It really is sickeningly, that's exactly what's happened.
Yes.
We're starting to wake up right now, which means that there's more and more and more to distract us, more wars, more this, more that. I actually don't believe there's going to be a World War III. I believe we're in World War III because I don't believe World War II actually ever ended. I'm not waiting for the Ukraine to explode into all-out war with Vladimir Putin. I think Putin is going to stay in control. He's going to continue to exercise caution, and I don't think he's going to get sucked into that stuff. Because I think what's going on is they're just ratcheting every single solitary conflict around the world up to just below the threshold of out-and-out war.
Yeah, well, they're not going to announce a war.
No.
They're not going to declare it. They're just going to go about their business and put it into play. I mean, talking about all these events, Cara, right? We have the entire border mess here in the United States. You have the Ukraine is still a mess. They've got, what's going on in the Middle East right now with Palestine. It's a fire hose of events and distractions and evil. Mm-hmm. That's how they operate.
Yeah. But I think it's, you brought up borders, so we might as well go there. Let's go not necessarily to immigration, although it certainly falls under the heading of immigration, but that's a big topic around the world. That's certainly a big topic in England, certainly in the United States. But I will tell you that England is trying to put its foot down right now. England does not want its borders overrun. One of the reasons it will probably leave the EU, although I'm really unclear about their status in the EU, because of the City of London, which is running the world economically, folks. This is the seat of the world economy, the City of London, just like Washington, D.C. is the seat of the army, armed conflict, that kind of thing. The Vatican City is the seat of all the nefarious things that happen via quote-unquote religion. Because London, the City of London is here, we've never used the euro. We are still on the pound. The British pound always does very well against the euro and the dollar. Holds its value, and that's not an accident. You will see Nigel Farage, who's one of my favorite people to watch, chewing out the heads of the EU Commission every time he gets a chance, and just telling them, look, we're not going to be part of the EU much longer anyway, although I still have a hard time. I guess it's really just in terms of employing EU citizens that we are a member of the EU, but it's a very strange relationship that Great Britain has with the EU.
Now, Nigel had huge gains, right, in the last election?
Yes. UKIP, which is his party, came out right on top, which I thought was sensational.
It was a bit concerning for the globalists.
Yeah. And he's just if he wants to walk us out of the EU, he will, and more power to him. I've seen him sitting with Ron Paul at these sovereign conferences. Yeah. And one of the things he said with Dr. Paul sitting right next to him, just chuckling away, was they play the European Union anthem, which means they've taken the Ode to Joy and bastardized it for the rest of the planet. And he said, do you think I stand and salute? I, by God, do not. so you get Dr. Paul chuckling to his side. Anyway, but Great Britain has some serious action going. They're trying to take serious action about securing their borders. It is not because they are anti anything except anti having their economy dissolved by the predator.
Right.
Predators trying to dissolve all of our economies, and the best way to do that is to leech all the money out of our countries, dissolve our borders, and just create economic mayhem that way. I'm going to tell the story that I tell because I want the United States and everyone listening to your show, Mike, to be absolutely horrified as I was. But in November of last year, I went to the United States to visit my children. And I changed planes in Toronto from London. And I was anticipating the usual 500 people deep lines at Logan when I got there for immigration. But lo and behold, I get off the plane in Toronto just to switch planes. They've taken my luggage off. There were probably 15 or 20 of us on this flight that were making connections into the United States. And all of a sudden, they'd gone through my luggage. The first thing I did was I went to a special area with all of these wonderful folks. And I had to scan my boarding card. And then I had to sit and watch this screen. And the screen, eventually my name would pop up on it. And it would say, apparently, that my luggage had cleared customs and that I was free to proceed to the next checkpoint. So I'm thinking, what the hell is this? But I did this and I went to the next checkpoint and I realized that I was looking at U.S. Customs. I was in the middle of a United States Customs office in Toronto, Canada. And as I'm standing in this line, literally saying out loud, I don't believe it. I couldn't stop myself from saying that out loud. I can't believe it. Because we all know about Pan America and
Right.
what they're trying to shove down our throats. And 20 years ago, Canada would have run us out of town on a rail for trying to do something like that. What, are you insane? So I approached this, same fellow that I was expecting to approach in Boston. Not only did he ask me what I'd been doing in England and why I'd been there and all of that stuff, but you know what, Mike? He asked me what I was going to be doing in Maine. He wanted to know what my business in Maine was.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Have you ever had a U.S. Customs agent ask you what you're doing, what you're going to be doing once you get back into your home country?
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
I couldn't believe it. And I thought, I have a big mouth, and I thought, gosh, I'm going to end up in trouble here. But he said, so what are you doing in Maine? And I just decided to look at it as a joke, And I said, oh, yeah, I guess that's probably a good question. What does one do in Maine? And I'm thinking, I can't. I said, I'm going home, man. What do you think I'm doing? This is a U.S. passport. I'm going home.
Right.
But he literally thought he had the right to ask me that question. And by God, he does not have the right to ask me that question. It's not his business.
Right. He's testing to see if you'll abdicate your rights.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing cops do when they pull you over. You need to say, where are you going?
Yeah.
You don't,
and one of the things,
don't answer that question.
Exactly. One of the things I had, okay, good, that's good. You should tell people that. One of the things that I had noticed about Logan Airport prior to this, about a year prior, and by the way, when I took off from Toronto, flying from Toronto to Boston was all of a sudden a local flight. I mean, there was nothing. I had been through the U.S. border. It's not in the United States anymore. And anyway, so one of the things that I had noticed in Boston is that the Transportation Authority, the TSA at Logan for about the last 2 years has been airing this vocal announcement over the PA system. If you're approached by a TSA officer and asked to show your papers, that kind of deal, show your passport and your ticket. We're sorry for this inconvenience, but we're trying to roll out new security. And if you cooperate, it will only take a few minutes. Well, what does that sound like to you?
Yeah, if you don't cooperate, we'll do a cavity search.
Well, right. Plus, this is fascism. I'm in Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
Show me your papers. Where are you going? I don't have to do that.
That's exactly right.
this is what, this
You're not
is,
free. I mean, that's it, everybody. When you're listening to this conversation, just listen to what we're saying. You are not free.
you
This
are
is the
not.
whole, you're going to give up freedom for security, right? And what did
Yeah.
Benjamin Franklin say? You
No.
deserve neither.
Right, right. And it's really an all or no, the thing that we've forgotten is it's an all or nothing thing, and we can talk about that when we get to my
Yeah.
new book, because there's a reason for that. But I wanted to talk about that because you have to understand that the borders are dissolving. And one of the ways that they keep us from talking about that is it's not politically correct to talk about the borders in the sense that if you do, if you talk about the fact that we need our sovereign borders, that implies that you're taking the food out of the mouth of some 4-year-old refugee who's trying to come across the border. They've equated those two things when in fact they're not. We should not be equating those two things. It's one thing to have human compassion for a suffering individual anywhere in the world. And the children always come first and all of those sorts of things. And that's just what it is to be human. It's another thing to let the predators dissolve our borders and destroy our not just the United States economy, it's every economy in the world. They're trying, but there are some that they're after more than others. China's fighting back, Russia's fighting back. Thank God Russia's sort of self-sufficient, But the Western countries, they're dissolving our borders so that they can dissolve our economies. It's really that simple. They're trying to bring us to our knees. Economically has nothing to do with the compassion and the goodwill you feel toward your fellows in another country.
No, it has nothing to do with compassion. It's all about a globalist agenda. As you're absolutely correct, Cara, it's about flattening this country economically.
It is. And until we can get that straight,
Yep.
we're sitting ducks. And President Obama, this is his agenda. This is his agenda, okay? President Obama is the biggest hoax that's ever been perpetrated. Well, certainly the capstone hoax that's been perpetrated on the United States. And he's another example of political correctness. I cannot say, and this is something that the Brits were kind of surprised about when I talked about it, but I cannot criticize Obama's policies. I cannot criticize the fact that I cannot say, I do not want you killing in my name, and I certainly don't want you using my tax dollars to do it. And I do not condone anything that you're doing in your forum. I can't say any of that without being accused of both spreading hate and being a racist. That requires absolutely no thought to level those sorts of accusations, because if you stopped and thought about that for a nanosecond, you will realize that if I criticize my president for killing people in my name, that is not racist. And I have every right and I have an obligation to do that. The Constitution says I have an obligation to do that, does it not?
It does.
And this is what's up with Israel. I said we should talk about this as well. This is where, this is really where it all started, this political correct stuff with the Frankfurt Institute, and then, which was the Institute for Social Research to begin with. That came out of Germany, but everyone, alas, on the original Frankfurt Institute roster was a Freudo-Marxist and also a Jewish, and they were not representative of what I might call an ordinary citizen of any kind, certainly not an ordinary person of the Jewish faith. These were psychopaths. This is a collection of psychopaths who managed to get some power. And this idea of political correctness, this separating us down to the nth degree as what we are, if you took me apart, what could you do? I'm a woman. I'm about 6 different ethnicities because I'm an American, and we all are. What else could you say? I'm 55, so I guess I'm an older American. You could go, I was raised a Methodist, so maybe you could pigeonhole me that way. Every way that they can pigeonhole people, they do, so that there are more and more and more degrees of separation. And the reason they do this, Mike, one reason they do this, so that we can never act as a collective whole, because we outnumber them by cajillions to 1.
Right.
And so they have to keep us wary of each other, paranoid about each other, at each other's throats. We need to be arguing about those sorts of things rather than embracing our collective humanity and bringing this world back to sanity.
It's divide and conquer.
It is. Bread and circuses and divide and conquer. Those are the two things. You know bread and circuses. Shall we talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
That's Roman. Okay. It's probably older than that, actually. But they call it bread and circuses because I think it was Julius Caesar probably said, look, give them bread and show them circuses. In other words, distract them from what's going on and they won't know what we're up to. It's as simple as that. That's what it means.
It's the same formula in place today.
Yep. It's still going on.
Yep.
And it's going on, the not depressing, but the can be overwhelming thing is that it's everything. We live in a hologram, guys. I'm going to break that to you right now. The whole thing is a hologram. They've invented this culture and this social strata, the social structure that we live in to distract us from what we're doing, and we need to unplug from that.
Just a breakdown of the whole mind-body dynamic.
Yep. Which is what my new book's about. Ta-da! And thank you, Mike, for putting the first chapter up on your site.
Very welcome.
It's being read by a lot of people, and that makes me really happy because it means that a lot of people are kind of picking up on this. And anyway, it's being written by myself, and I'm taking the first half. The second half of the book is being written by a fellow called Harold Kautzabella. I said I would come back to him. He's German. He's also Jewish. Thank you very much. Spent part of his growing up years in a kibbutz in Israel. And he's a scientist. He's a chemist, and he's also deeply, deeply, deeply esoterically adept and a deep clairvoyant and all of those wonderful things that you want to be when you're trying to back yourself up and understand what's going on in the world, because a lot of what's going on in the world is satanic and black magic and all of those things. And so it pays to be able to pick these sorts of things up. But Harold is someone I want to say met by accident, but I don't really believe in accidents. He appeared when I needed to have The Sun Thief translated and offered to do it. And we've sort of been inseparable in our work in a lot of ways ever since. I guess we're supposed to do some stuff together. He's written the second part of the book, and it came out of his work at an open line conference in Oslo in 2012. And he titled his part of the book, which I'm going to have to talk to him about because it's not really very catchy. The Chemistry and Contrails, Assessing the Impact of Aerosols from Jet Fuel Impurities, Additives, and Classified Military Operations on Nature.
You'll have to wordsmith that.
Yeah, we're going to have to make that subtitle. Anyway, it's really funny because he and I kind of do argue a little bit about what to title things when we're working on things. And as of right now, the book is called Aerosol War, the Covert Assimilation of Humanity. What do you think of that? I
think it's great.
You think that's good? Okay, so it may be called that, assuming Harold and I can agree, and I think we can. But some of the stuff that's in he's taken on Morgellons, for which he actually has observed a cure in Germany. Thank you very much. He has taken on the idea of sentient oil, and he has observed studies and successful outcomes for an antidote to sentient oil. I'm probably getting him killed just by saying this. It's not unusual that he is hassled in the extreme, but he will never stop. I know that.
Is he working with, does he know Cliff Carnicom?
He knows of Cliff Carnicom. I don't know if they work together. There's a lot of this stuff. It's not just Cliff. Cliff is like the lion of this, trying to figure out what's going on biologically and do something about it. Cliff is like the gold standard. If you want to know what's going on biologically with Morgellons and things like that, go to Clifford Carnicom. And I think it's just cliffordcarnicom.com maybe, or
it's .org.
Carnicom Institute maybe?
It's carnicom.org. I think .com is a disinformation site, believe it.
Is it? Don't go there.
That's how influential Clifford's work has been. Yeah. You know, somebody has gone out of their way to put a disinfo site out there.
Okay, and I know that Mark McCandlish knows him really well, and there was a period of time when Cliff, you couldn't get a reply from Cliff if you sent him a message, and there was a period of time where they were hassling him so heavily that he just kind of shut down for a little while. But Cliff's work is impeccable. Scientifically, there's no arguing with it. But that is actually also going on around the world now, which is the good news. Anyway, this came out of Oslo. And Harold likes to take on people like Ray Kurzweil and his transhumanism. Yeah. And he talks about things on a biological level. let me just read a little bit of this. I promise to keep it short. And also, I want you to understand that he makes it very, very understandable. Please don't be afraid of what Harold has to say here just because I say it's big science. It's very understandable. The main hypothesis is that barium, strontium, and aluminum absorb the light emitted in plants and by doing so stop cell division. Additionally, terrestrial radiation triggering the crystals could alter the cell potential and thus disbalance the plant's immune system. So you see, he's gone after the cellular damage, and this is plants. This is everything around you that isn't human or animal. This is everything that we rely on.
Yeah.
These three items that they're dropping from the sky are disrupting cell division in plants, among a million other things, of course. He talks about how that affects people as well, all the way up to how it affects entire lands, oceans. And as I said, he has been witness to some successful cures of Morgellons. He has done a lot of work with sentient oil and how that affects the reptilian portion of our brains. See, this is some serious work that this fellow has done.
Cara, could you explain to the audience a little bit about sentient oil, what is meant by that?
Yeah, I can. This is something they don't want us to know about either. Now, there's some argument about how old it is, where it comes from, things like that. Some people say it's a substance. Let me just start there. It's a substance that looks a lot like, the best description is like antifreeze. It's an oily sort of substance. And it's volatile, and it seems to be sentient. In other words, it has some sort of intelligence that seems to be computer-like, like an artificial, like an AI kind of intelligence, although obviously it's some kind of organic substance. Anyway, it's inert at certain temperatures, low temperatures, and there's a lot of it under the seabed, for one thing. It becomes operative as it warms up. Without getting too far into it, I can say that, of course, there are some psychopaths on this planet who wanted to see what happens when you warm it up. And there have been a lot of people who have died because when you come in contact with it, death is one of the outcomes. Now, I'm not there. I can't tell you exactly how that happens. There are some people, one of the things that's absolutely been verified is that there was a scientific laboratory near London that was trying to work with this substance, and they couldn't figure out what it was or what it did, but scientists were dying, and they also couldn't figure out how to get rid of it. So you know what they did, Mike? They dumped it down the drains. It's in the sewers of London.
Unbelievable.
And there are people who have come forward stating positively that they've actually come in contact with it and talking about how it affects their biology. And this is how we know that it has some sort of mocks some sort of AI capability, because they will talk about having this need to order things in a sort of numerical fashion. That's almost like a hunger,
yeah.
like having to eat your lunch or your dinner. There's a part of them that simply has to find things to order in their mind and their intelligence. So this is out there. It's in a lot more places than you might think it is. Like I said, we know for sure it's in the sewers of London. There are people who think it's in our petroleum, in our oil, our engine oil. It's, there was a supposed, there are things. This is a dangerous thing to talk about, Mike. You know that. Sentient oil is something that, if you start talking about that, they really start watching you very closely. But Harold talks about it all the time, and it is going to be in the second half of the book. And you'll be hearing and seeing more and more about it because, like I always say, they can't plug all the holes. So that's the second half of the book. And Harold is a wonderful writer and very charismatic and very able to get things across in a simple manner. And the first half of the book is the one I'm taking care of, and it is a direct result of the phenomenon that I thought to myself, if one more person asks me, couldn't that be a contrail? Why isn't that just a contrail? Why is that a chemtrail? What are you talking about? I thought I might jump off a building because honestly, that those questions have been put to bed.
Yes.
The fact that people are still arguing that just points to the both manipulability of who we are right now and the power of the silencing that they've imposed upon us. There are people who say that the United States is an electromagnetic concentration camp now. And I believe that. I think that's probably the case. Bill Clinton, one of his jobs as president was to cover our country with Gwen Towers. And he happily did that while he was in office, and he calls it one of his legacies. And those Gwen Towers can now transmit signals that will make your DNA dance. And if your DNA dances because of what's in there now, because we have bioaccumulated the stuff that's coming down from the skies, from the airplanes, it's in us on a cellular level. And so that's the 1-2 punch. We've bioaccumulated all this stuff that they're dropping on us, and it resonates.
Well, we're active receivers now.
It reacts to frequency.
Yeah.
Okay. And how do they make us dance? Well, look for your dearest Gwen Tower, or now your cell phone, and when I first heard someone call my country an electromagnetic concentration camp, I wept. I did. I wept. It was so staggeringly horrifying to hear that phrase. My children are there, for God's sake. Okay? But I also realized, Mike, that this is the reason that I was sort of directed out of the country. I had no intention of leaving the United States and living in Europe. It never entered my mind. And yet, all of a sudden, one day, after the book was done, and that was all done and dusted, I literally felt like someone had spun me around and pointed me at Europe, and that's where I was going to end up. And I think there are lots of reasons for that, but one of the best things is that I was able to shake off a lot of the effect of living there.
Yeah.
Because no matter what I tried there, and I was constantly in a state of detoxing myself to try to stay ahead of what was going on, it was going to catch up with me, or I was just I was going to stay abreast of it, or, by leaving the United States, I was able to get more of my conscious mind back, and now I can write from outside the States and try to send it back in.
Well, these cell towers, Cara, they're all over the place.
Yeah, they are.
They're all over the place. Anybody who's listening, and hopefully a lot of people listening to the show, get in your car, drive down the street,
yep,
and you'll see every quarter mile, at the very least every half mile, at least where I am in North Carolina, they've got these cell towers. They've got them next to hospitals, next to police stations.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah, they're everywhere, and it's evil.
It is evil, and it's unnecessary. People have proved without a shadow of a doubt that the cellular activity, Wi-Fi activity, microwave activity is boiling our cells.
Yeah.
It's killing us. It's absolutely killing us. So, and then there it is. And that's without what they can do if they decide they want to turn it on and make us dance in some way. Yeah?
Yeah.
This book came about because I wanted to work with Harold, number one. And number two, because I knew that one of the things that happens with human beings is if you repeat something often enough, they start tuning it out. That's just how we are. And so if we're in a situation where I'm giving an interview on a show with 80,000 people, a video interview, and the host is actually literally asking me, so, Cara, what's the difference between a contrail and a chemtrail? And then I answer that, and then the next question is, well, too many people would have to know about it. That's what they always say to me, Cara. What do you say to that? Well, I say that we live in the most compartmentalized planet in the universe, if you haven't figured that out. And that's very much on purpose. That was very much part of the social engineering of the 20th century, to make sure that one hand does not know what the other hand is doing. It's easy. If you've been in the military, you get this. You get this in spades.
Yeah.
That you don't have to know what's going on either above you or below you. You just have to say how high when somebody says jump. Well, and the whole world is like that now.
Large multinational corporations, the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing your job. Do you think you really know what's going on in the boardroom or in the CEO's corner office? You do not.
Right, exactly. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to address this, and I'm going to do it short, sweet, and simple, and I'm going to do it like I always do it. I'm going to tell it like it is, give enough of a background so that people understand why I'm saying the things that I'm saying, but give them places that they can go if they want to do more research, because the last thing I want to do is have people tune it out because they just can't take it. It's too intense, right? And then I never do anything, Mike, that's an exercise in hand wringing. I never write things where the cliffhanger is, oh my God, we're all going to die. But I never say anything beyond that because I don't believe in that.
Right.
Okay. And so I talk about some of the ways that I think that we can dismantle this, and really it's pretty easy. Pretty easy. I'm not gonna get into that right now. I did want to say the first thing I wanted to talk about, and you have the first chapter of the book up, so I can give you an idea of what some of the things that are in the book. The dangerous imagination you've put up, because the first thing we have to look at is the education system. Get your kids out of government schools. Get your kids out of government schools. That's, if you love your children, that is the first thing that you need to try to do. And I realize that they have us trapped, and they have us trapped in a big way. But, if there are also tremendous networks of homeschooling groups, there are alternative schools that, yes, they cost money. If you can find a way to get your kid away from a government school, please do. Because it's just a giant indoctrination camp,
That's right.
And it's a prison, and it's ruining our children. So many times, this is what happened when I first started talking about the Sun Thief. I would get very emotional and choked up. But this is real. This is absolutely real. What they're doing to our kids in the school is a huge crime. And I know that I may have talked about this with you already, but my oldest son got out in 3 years because he had something he wanted to do, and I was very excited about that. They wanted to go to a state secondary school, and I said, you have to let them. At a certain stage, you have to let them. They'd been in Steiner schools, Waldorf schools, because that's also what I do. I'm a Steiner teacher, a Waldorf teacher, which is an alternative pedagogy, and was actually developed by a fellow called Rudolf Steiner in about 1919, I think, as an antidote to what was going on in the school system, believe it or not. And he would say, get your kids out of state-run schools, because if something doesn't change, it's all over. He was one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, certainly of the 20th century. If you get a chance to look him up, I don't want to digress too far, and my daughter, just before she turned 17, she said, Mom, can I quit? I said, yep, you sure can. You could stop, absolutely. Take your general education analysis, whatever that GED thing is, because all that says is that you know everything you need to have gotten out of high school. Guys, it's no shame. It's no shame to take that test. All over the world, they have that test for children. They take the basic skill level test. Good, you got everything you needed to get out of high school, and you want to go do something else. All right. So, and my daughter's an artist. She's a gifted artist, and I didn't want her ruined. So I said, sure, let's do that. And then you go and you be. You be an artist, please. And then my youngest son, I've said to him, let's just get this done. You know how I feel about this. I know that you feel like you need that piece of paper to get on with what you want to do, and that's fine. But you also know that I think that this is just a giant exercise in brainwashing. So let's just get out of here.
Yeah.
And get you where you need to go to do what it is that you need to do. And I'm a teacher, and I'm an American, okay? And I'm saying these things. But that's really what it is.
That's what it is. I mean, here in the United States, we have Common Core.
Yeah, see, I'm going to have to touch on that in this book. And people are out of, educators who would never have stepped forward up until now are out of their minds, crazy, angry, scared to death that this is going to land on the American child. It's that bad.
It's all there to create a village of idiots. I mean, 2 + 2 = 5, if that's what you want to believe. It's that type of nonsense, And
it isn't because it's something new that they came up with because they're so much smarter than we are. It's because they're lying to us.
Exactly.
It's because they're trying to say, no, you don't see what you see. 2 + 2 really is 5. So don't be stupid. Don't fall for that.
Right.
Please. And don't make your children fall for that. Jeez. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about that. First thing I got to talk about is education, and then all through the book I have to touch back on education because everything that they rolled out to control us, they took back into the schools. Okay, so that includes behaviorism. John Watson, I talk about him a little bit. He operated out of Johns Hopkins University, I think in the 20s or 30s, and he was another one of those people who said, give me a child until he's 7. Actually, that was Loyola. That was the Jesuits. But along the same lines, Watson said, give me a baby and I can make him anything I want him to.
Right.
I want to make him. And all of those experiments that were performed all over, certainly the United States and Canada, and possibly in Western Europe, on children and adults as well, but certainly on lots and lots of babies, is how they discovered how they can make us do anything that they want us to do. Babies are not born afraid of the dark. Babies are not born with fear, really, of any kind. And one of the first things John Watson figured out is that he could make a baby afraid. Well, what kind of a sick, what kind of science is that to begin with? Okay, who does that kind of stuff? And
well, it's a science that believes that humanity is nothing more than a bunch of lab rats.
Exactly. And so he would do things like present a soft furry bunny to a baby and realize that the baby was, once he figured out that this was a soft furry thing and lovely to touch and warm and wonderful, he would make really sharp, loud noises behind the baby whenever the rabbit appeared, so as to make the baby afraid of the rabbit. And just this simple experiment was a eureka moment for him. Oh my God, I can do anything I want. I can make a baby afraid of anything I wanted to make afraid of. And we were off to the races at that point. That's behaviorism. That's Pavlov's dog. Do you realize that your children change classes to the ring of a bell?
Right.
How Pavlovian is that's real Pavlovian science.
And they get 45 minutes out in the yard like they would in prison.
Yes, exactly, if that. And they lost that during No Child Left Behind for a while. I was trying to teach in Kentucky during that period of time. And, time that 6 or 7-year-olds spent at the drinking fountain was considered lost time. They no longer got to go outside and play because they weren't meeting Governor Bush's standards. And in fact, during that period of time, my youngest son was in second grade, 8 years old, and had to have surgery at that time on both his feet. And the school knew that he was going to have to be out. And he was in a wheelchair, and he had casts on both feet when he came back and all of those things, right? We still had to present ourselves to the truant officer to prove that he hadn't been truant for that 2 weeks. And that was because schools were paid by the minute that the children were in school. And so it was that desperate to prove why our school had been gypped out of 2 weeks' worth of No Child Left Behind money. This is a 6-6 society.
Yeah.
And these children aren't going outside because they have to meet certain standards. And, and so now on top of that kind of stuff, we have Common Core, which makes No Child Left Behind look like nothing.
Yeah, and they give you, the kids, the standardized testing to make sure that, you pass the left brain robot test.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't pass the left brain robot test, then there's something wrong with your child, and we have to take them for further evaluation. Perhaps we need to drug them. Right. So it's let's take away all of the arts, so there won't be any more music program, there won't be any more theater program.
Right.
And that's just to push them all into that left brain, very controlled, organized, logical hemisphere of the brain, which is really getting them prepped for the corporate world.
Absolutely, that's what it's getting. And not even the corporate world. I mean, corporate world is a shiny term for what it's really getting us prepped for. I mean, you're touching on another subject that's actually part of what's in the book. This what came out of the Industrial Revolution, Fordism. Everything is an assembly line. Everything's compartmentalized so that the worker feels that they have no power. And these were things that were ordered by the giant industrialists to try to make sure that people didn't assert any rights or talk back.
Right.
That made sure they accepted their condition.
Yeah, just get in line.
Yeah, get in line, and that actually was translated right into the school system, wasn't it? So that's part of what I'm writing about. And then what the other thing that's insidious that people need to know about, that people are starting to find out about, is that the Bolshevik Revolution that did not succeed in Russia, did not succeed because people were they expected the peasantry to rise up and overthrow the Tsar on the heels of World War I, and it did not happen. And it did not happen because the Russian people were not fighting for the Tsar, and they were not fighting as a proletariat. The Russian people were doing something very simple and very human. They were acting out of a collective folk soul that was under attack. So they were acting as a unit, as the Russian folk soul, and sort of protecting themselves spiritually and esoterically. Regardless, it didn't work, much to the chagrin of the people who wanted it to work. So there's a group that came together, first I think in Hungary, but they got kicked out of Hungary for trying to introduce women's rights and also for trying to sexualize children as early as kindergarten. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
They got kicked out of there pretty early on, and they went to Germany, and they formed the Institute of Social Research at Frankfurt University, and it became known as the Frankfurt School, but that really just had to do with where it was located. And this was a group of people who were financed by a wealthy German Marxist, Bolshevik Marxist, and he wanted them to try to keep that flame alive and see how they could reignite that and perhaps spread it to the rest of the world. One of the things that they concocted in their little think tank, which explains a lot, is in their estimation 10% of the world's population was psychopathic. There was something seriously deranged about their subconscious, yeah? And in fact, Freudianism was coming out of England at that time, and so they adopted that despite the fact that there have never been any there's no scientific foundation to psychoanalysis. There never has been. But they adopted it, and they became Freudo-Marxists, and they decided that 10% of the world really needed psychoanalysis. They needed to be dealt with, changed in some way that they felt made them tolerable. But there was no way to select out that 10% of the world, and so they decided that the entire world should be forced to undergo some sort of psychoanalysis, Freudian behavior modification was sort of coming up at the same time, but therapy, I suppose, is the best way to put it. Let's put the world into therapy, and there was really only one way to do that, Mike. That's through the schools. Even though people think I'm kidding, people think I must be making this up because it's so outlandish, because it is so outlandish. But in fact, that is what has happened. They actually succeeded in creating these institutions that we call schools where they are trying to change us.
Absolutely. I mean, it started with psychiatry, which was a fringe and still is. It's very fringe, you know. Mm-hmm. They wanted to make it mainstream, and it started with, as you know, Cara, in hospitals and essentially institutions that dealt with people with quote-unquote mental disorders.
Right.
And doing all kinds of testing on those patients. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and then as that got traction and it was legitimized through nefarious means,
right.
Then, as you just said, it moved to schools, and it's very prevalent now, not only in our schools, but in our military.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they have been fairly successful in changing, certainly. I mean, I really try only to talk about the United States because that's my immediate experience. And I think it's a good example. Don't get me wrong, this is going on all over the world. But in the United States, I talk about the U.S. because that's what I know. And the same group of people located the nuclear family, as one of the things they had to destroy if they wanted to change children, which is what they wanted to do, because if you get a hold of the children, you know, they're very receptive. They're brand new on the planet. God bless them. Their imaginations are new and wonderful. They're very open because they're learning how to be here. And every cell of their being is learning all the time. So of course they targeted the children, and they're still targeting the children. But the only way to get to them was to do what they've done to our schools, break up the nuclear family. The first thing they did was destroy the image of the father. This is sort of beyond our memory, although we live with it all the time. Homer Simpson is a really good example of the buffoon that they've turned the American father into. But they very early realized that a family with an authority figure, the male authority figure, the children in that family were quite difficult to turn. It's quite difficult to manage and manipulate in the ways that they wanted to manage and manipulate them. So they had to demonize the father of the family, the white male for sure. And then they got women out of the household. I spent a lot of time working in odd hours, like 7 p to 7 a in hospitals, so I could be available to my children, things like that. But because I did not work a traditional job, I was vilified. I wanted to be available to my children, and you know what? We were poor as church mice for a very long time, but I felt like it was gold in the bank for them. They've made it very, very, very very difficult for women to be able to stay home with their children. Not only have they made it just about impossible financially, you have to make unbelievable sacrifices,
Yeah.
but you will be vilified as a female if that's your choice. And frankly, I have found some of the most creative, amazing, gifted women turning all of that toward motherhood. It's like that's what they were born with, all of these gifts to do. And why not? What's more important than that? Your children are with you for the thinnest slice of your life.
Right.
You know?
Well, look, Cara, in most companies they give the mother 6 weeks off. That's it for maternity
Yeah.
leave. After
Yeah.
6 weeks, who watches the child? Well, then the parents have got to figure that out.
Yeah.
So, many times the child is with somebody that is really not a parental influence. It's a
Right.
daycare. Many kids are in preschool because parents have to work in order to maintain a household. So
Right.
you're absolutely right. The whole parental structure, especially the father figure, and I'm not downplaying the
Oh no,
role of
it's
the mother.
all
It's very,
important.
very
That's the
important,
thing.
but the father figure has been completely destroyed.
Right. And you have to understand when I think one of the ways that it's helpful to sort of get these ideas of male and female, which we really shouldn't even say male and female because that's how the corporatocracies look at us and designate us as objects. We should say man and woman. One of the ways it's helpful to get that back in your head in a way that it should be in your head is to understand that there's a sacred feminine and a sacred masculine. They're both sacred. It's difficult now. It's easier for people in a post-feminist world to talk about the goddess, which is our planet Sophia, and talk about the sacred feminine than it is to say sacred masculine. The first time you say sacred masculine is kind of a weird feeling.
Yeah.
Because we are so programmed to think the male, is what's wrong.
Right.
With everything.
Right.
Top to bottom. And what's
Yeah, because
wrong
people
is
say,
that.
"Oh, what's wrong with the planet is men run it." No, what's wrong with the
No,
planet is psychopaths run it.
what's wrong with the planet is that we have a predator, and I can't
Yep.
say that often enough. We have a predator with a capital P. And then we've talked about political correctness. That came out of the Frankfurt Institute. The Tavistock Institute is its sister, if not its precursor in England. This is where Freud came from. This is where his nephew Edward Bernays came from, who came into the United States with his book Propaganda under his arm. This is the group of people who turned the media turned it on us as a weapon. Television is a weapon. You have to understand all this stuff is controlled, and it's a weapon. And they don't call it a program on television for nothing.
Right.
It's a program. They're programming us all the time. So if I could say one thing right now, it would be turn off your TV. Turn off your TV. Start getting read up on all of this stuff so that when you go to the movies, you recognize propaganda when they're slapping you in the face with it. You recognize what's being done to you. Okay. So I don't want to, we have a lot of things to talk about. I don't want to spend too much time on this in particular, but I do want you to understand that this is what's coming out via myself and Harold. And I think it's important, and really it's an answer to the one question. Is it a contrail or is it a chemtrail?
Yeah.
And then you answer it, and it's like this. If you ever saw the movie The Stepford Wives, it's like that. It's like someone hit the reset button in the middle of their forehead. Click. I did not hear that. And next time the subject comes up, I'm going to ask the same damn question. And I'm going to get it for a nanosecond, and then the reset button's going to hit. Click. Do you see? You have to understand that's where we are.
Yeah. One of the reasons why earlier in our discussion I had mentioned I had taken pictures out at Topsail Island in North Carolina. And one of the reasons why I took those pictures was because, I know people that will tell me that they live on the coast of North Carolina and will say, oh, we don't have any spraying here.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm thinking to myself, how can that possibly be? I mean, they're just spraying over Raleigh?
Yeah.
Right? And so when I went out there, it's very clear that the only reason you would make that statement is because you are completely unaware or completely in denial.
Yeah. And some of that stuff stays up there for months.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't even realize that, but it takes months for it to fall.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's in everything.
Yeah, it's in everything. It's
Yeah.
absolutely in everything. Now, the other thing I wanted to say to you, because I really quickly, because this is something people don't think about either. This is, I think, fairly new information. But do you remember the Korean War had this reputation for being a war in which mind control sort of came to the fore? You know, we would talk about POWs coming back, mind control, the idea of the Manchurian candidate sort of came to our consciousness. That sort of revolved around the Korean War. And there's one thing that they say about the Korean War in retrospect. They say that that is how we came to welcome the 3 Ds: debility, dependency, and dread. We live in a 3D world for sure. But think about that since post 1950. Debility. Now this is prisoner of war stuff.
Right.
Okay? Debility. Make it so I'm sick all the time. Make it so I'm at the mercy of the pharmacy companies, or, there's just something always wrong with me. I'm not particularly capable anymore. We've talked about the fact that our children are just sort of dissolving in front of our eyes because they've shot them up with mercury, and they're being assaulted environmentally constantly, and they're eating food that isn't food. It's poison, and just all of these things. Debility. Okay, that's the first D. What happens when you're under a situation of debility? You become dependent.
Yep.
Dependency. You're dependent on the medicines. You're dependent because you can't grow your own food anymore. In some places it's illegal because of course they don't want you growing your own food anymore. You cannot help. You're taught that you cannot help yourself. You can. Absolutely you can. But you're taught that you can't. So you've got debility and then you've got dependency. You are dependent on the government for your roads and for your hospitals, and you think you're dependent on them for your schools. You're dependent on the government for food stamps, for regulating everything, for your energy, for everything. They have us dependent upon them. I have this conversation with my oldest son because he can't understand why I would like to see the sovereign states really come back in a big way. Mom, who would build the roads? How would we get the infrastructure? Do you know this argument, right?
Yep.
Well, the states would have to take care of that. What? Oh, you would just like to dissolve the Articles of Confederation, would you? Well, maybe. I certainly would like the sovereign states to step up and be the 50 little kingdoms they're supposed to be, But anyway.
So right now the 50 states are nothing more than a franchise to Washington, D.C. and the international bankers. I mean, that's what people have to get their heads wrapped around. You're not sovereign, or the states are not sovereign.
No. Well, but it would be a fairly easy, if perhaps dangerous matter for them to investigate their own sovereignty. I mean, you have to be careful when you're saying stuff like that. But you can become a citizen. I was born in Colorado. I can become a citizen of Colorado. I can't tell you what the ins and outs of that are right offhand, but if you want to investigate that, people are doing that. And people are doing that all over the world, by the way. People are doing it in Germany. They're declaring themselves sovereign individuals and becoming their own kingdoms. Just them.
Yeah.
You can do it. The only problem is, I think what the one problem that no one has come up with a solution to yet, a workable solution to yet, is the idea of a passport.
This is the thing. In some cases, some of what we have in place works fine.
Uh-huh.
In the case of a passport, as an example.
Yeah.
The problem, though, is that it is in every aspect of our life. Every single thing you do on any given day has government influence and government tentacles in it.
Right.
That's the thing.
And those of us who are old enough to still have some memory of some shred of sovereignty have to make sure that gets back out into the world, that impulse, yeah?
Right.
So this third D, this won't surprise you, Mike. Debility, dependency, and dread.
Right.
D-R-E-A-D, dread. Boy, do we have a relationship to that idea now. Do we not?
We do.
Terror. Another word for dread is terror.
Yeah.
Okay? So we live in a 3D world right now, post-Korean War. Debility, dependency, and dread. And I like to point that out because that's really simple. You can get your brain around that, and you can trace that right back to the POW experiments that we think centered around the Korean War. Yeah? and the Manchurian Candidate and all of that. And I think that cracks a nut for us to think of it that way.
Yeah, well, the dread aspect is really, most people will be able to relate to it from the perspective of fear.
Yeah.
Because it's a fear-based program that they have.
Right, right. And what did I say about John Watson? We do not come into this world fearful. We are not, fear is not our natural state. Forget this fight or flight stuff as being the natural state of the human being,
No,
because
taught.
it isn't. It's taught to us. We are conditioned to fear things. We are conditioned to fear things that are manufactured for us to fear. Naturally, a human being does not create things to fear. Naturally, a human being isn't afraid of anything. This is manufactured.
Cara, I just wanted to ask you, with your book, the new book that you're writing, Aerosol War?
Yeah, Aerosol War.
When is it going to be released? Do you have a release date yet?
No, I'm putting it together. Harold is getting permission to translate it, because our wonderful German publisher loves us and has said she'll put it out in German. But that's neither here nor there. That's for the German-speaking population, and it will take him however long it takes him. But I should have the English language version put together by the end of September, I would think.
Okay, great.
And I will make sure everybody knows when it's out. And if there's another sample, maybe I'll put out a sample of Harold's work, so you can see what that looks like as well, the second half of the book.
Yeah, put it out there.
Yeah, because this is really, really important. We obviously need some lessons in why we've ended up how we have ended up. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to stop. It's a giant game, though, Mike. We do have the option of just putting down our toys and walking away from the game.
We do, and the hardest part is getting people to realize that they can do that. Just non-compliance.
Yep, non-compliance, exactly.
Non-compliance, and it's very difficult for people to get their heads wrapped around that.
Yeah.
You know.
We talked about a lot of stuff today, huh?
We did. It was great, and we're up to the 2-hour mark. So.
Are we serious?
Yeah. It's been a great conversation. We've covered so much ground. I love it.
Yeah, and what's really funny, you guys, whoever's listening out there, I've already told him the other things that I really need to talk to him about, but we have to make another appointment for that because there's no such thing as a 4-hour show, right, Mike?
Right.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Yeah, well, we wanted to talk about, I guess the next time around, we said one of the topics would be the early sexualization of children.
Yeah, that's huge. We got to talk about that. I'll give you a preview of that so that you'll know what's coming. You want me to do a 1-minute preview?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. It's recently come to my attention that in Germany, which is, by the way, a big social laboratory for the United States, I want to say that one of the people in the Frankfurt Institute, his name was Herbert Marcuse, in 1950 was sent back to Germany to denazify Germany, quote unquote. But his wife, strangely enough, worked for naval intelligence. And Herbert Marcuse was the only person, to my knowledge, that I've ever come up with, and this has been stated, to hold both a German and an American passport at the same time, so that he could go back and forth and quote unquote denazify Germany. But he was the head of the Frankfurt Group, and the Frankfurt Group, I just described what they were up to, yeah? Anyway, what's just come to my attention is the children in Germany in state schools are being sexualized in kindergarten. They have what they call cozy corners or comfy corners, something like that. Children are being asked to shed their clothes and disappear into these corners and explore each other's bodies.
Are you serious?
I'm serious as a heart attack.
Oh my God!
This is what's going on. They're being in kindergarten, being presented with anatomically correct, penises, and do you see what I'm saying? This is what's going on. So there's really 3 things happening. Those children are being sexually assaulted by having to go through this. Teachers are being forced into the position of being assaulters. Yes, these are their teachers. And parents who object are going to jail. Okay? Now, this is an attack this is one way to mess up a child permanently, fracture a child permanently and forever. Okay? And they know that. There's nothing about this. It's informational. This is about assaulting them at the base chakra and making sure that they're just fractured. And fractured children are much easier to form into whatever it is that you want them to be. Books are being put out. I think I put something on my Facebook site not too long ago that I also had to apologize for. But books are being put out in English for children that age that specifically talk about your father's penis in your mother's vagina. And if this is making you uncomfortable out there, I'm sorry. I am. And making it sort of this story about the wonderful little sperms that entered your... No kid in the world, even my 21-year-old, doesn't want to hear about his parents having sex. Okay?
Exactly.
That's number one.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's natural and normal.
Right.
They don't want to, they should never have to think about their parents in that way.
Now, Cara, is there an outcry, or are the parents and the teachers just rolling over on this?
No. There are big demos going on in Germany. You have to understand, I hope that the United States is starting to understand how poorly we are using the German people and how poorly we've been doing that, how that's been going on since...
Well, they've been vilified since World War II.
Yeah, prior to World War One.
Yeah,
actually.
Well, right.
The Tavistock Institute got some newspapers to start printing things about the Germans and about the Kaiser that just weren't true.
Yeah, I meant in this country, after World War II with Hitler and the Nazis, it became, just melded into people's brains here that Germans are evil.
Yeah, but what we're doing is using them as a lab.
Yeah.
We're using them as a lab to see what we can roll out into the rest of the world. Make no mistake, that's what we're doing to these poor people, okay? But the Germans, yes, are protesting, because I think what happens is what always happens with these bastards. Excuse my language. You're going to have to cut that, Mike.
Perhaps I won't, because you're absolutely right.
Is that they run into a situation where we love our children more than we fear our enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens every time. And you may not sexually assault these children.
No.
And that is being talked about, being brought to the United States in state schools.
It's sick.
You must know that. It is sick. It's as sick as it gets.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people are not going to know about this. Maybe, some who listen to the program obviously do, but there's many that won't. This goes back to just how children in general are used for ritualistic purposes.
Yep.
Right. So this is in that same vein.
Yeah. So this is something I'd like for you and I to talk about soon.
Absolutely.
So that people are in the know. Yeah. And I will make sure I bring lots and lots and lots of sources so people can go there themselves and have a look at what's going on. And importantly, I will try to find out just how far it's gotten in the United States.
Okay. All right. So we'll reconnect maybe in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. You let me know.
I will.
And we'll talk about that.
Well, Cara, do you want to give your website again?
Yeah. www.vortexcourage.me. Please come and join the conversation. If you feel like you've got something to say and you're a writer or you want to be, or you just have something important to report from your part of the world, feel free to contact us there. I think should be able to send me a message there. If you can't send me a message there, I'll make sure that I put an email up right on the front page. Okay?
Okay.
So that it will be exclusively for that. So, please, if you feel that you need to email me and tell me what a crazy nut job I am, okay, I guess you can. But I'd rather you be talking about what you can contribute to Vortex, or making suggestions, things you want to hear about, things that are going on, stuff like that.
Excellent.
I love talking to you, Mike. You're the best.
Well, thank you, Cara. I love speaking with you also. It's just so frank and honest and so truthful, and it's just good to connect. And we will get back together again maybe in another 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, great, Mike. And thanks for all your help. Seriously, you're doing such an amazing job.
Well, thank you. So are you.
Really.
Yeah.
Okay, buddy.
All right, Cara.
I'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye now. And that concludes my interview with Cara St. Louis, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Cara's e-magazine can be found at vortexcourage.me, and Cara's book, The Sun Thief, can be purchased from Amazon.com. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and for visiting the blog, The Sage of Quay. Also, you could take a listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia, by heading to laboroflovemusic.com. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.